Thanks very much, Madonna. And it's been an honour to talk with the residents of this street today who've had devastation, families. We've heard about little babies put on boats to be rescued. We heard about a woman who was 35 weeks pregnant with twins having to be evacuated in order to ensure that she was safe, because there was no chance of her swimming out in that condition, given the 2.5 metres of water that impacted on this community. I've been to flood-affected communities here in Brisbane on a number of occasions, and it is just quite shocking to see the devastation that was there. The residents of this street are, of course, unable to continue to occupy their homes. There'll be a lot of work needed to be done in the future. But what we saw from the federal government, whether it be bushfires, floods or the pandemic, is a real pattern of behaviour. Scott Morrison, after the election in the 2019-20 bushfires, went missing, and he failed to act soon enough, and he only acted when the political pressure was really put on. On the pandemic, he said it wasn't a race and didn't order enough vaccines. And we know that not only were we not at the front of the queue, which Mr Morrison said, we were way, way, way at the back of the queue. And on floods, we saw again a political response rather than a human response, rather than looking at people who were going through a really tough time and saying, what can we do to help? There's something that defines Australians. They make sacrifices for each other. They look after each other. Neighbour looking after neighbour, stranger looking after stranger. That's what happened here in the floods with people in tinnies rescuing families. That's what happened during the bushfire crisis. And that's what happened during the pandemic as well, with people going out there and getting vaccinated so that not just for their own health, but for the health of everyone they came into contact with. What we need is a government that is as good and strong and committed as the Australian people are themselves to helping each other. A government that steps up, that doesn't have to be pressured into stepping up. And on the floods, of course, we've seen a politicisation. We've seen members like Catherine Cusack from the Liberal Party, Jeff Probus from the National Party, state MPs saying that they couldn't see themselves continuing to support the Morrison government because of the way that Scott Morrison government made political decisions based upon what electorate you were in New South Wales or what state you were in, whether you're in New South Wales or Queensland. We need to do much better. The Queensland government wrote to Scott Morrison, asked for support, and then Scott Morrison wrote back and said, no, it's not available for the share of the $700 million plus package that they wanted to help people get back on their feet. It was only after a few days' pressure that Scott Morrison changed his mind. It should be a partnership, not just a partnership between governments, a partnership between people and government. A government that people should be able to rely upon to step up. And it's similar in terms of people being left behind when it comes to the government's decision that they've made to make Anne Ruston the health minister. This is a health minister now, designate, if they're successful in the election, who we know will undermine Medicare, who has said that the current model is not sustainable, who has said that Medicare funding is just putting things on the credit card and that it needs to change. This is another example of what we can expect if Scott Morrison is re-elected. If Scott Morrison is re-elected, we can expect cuts to health, cuts to education, cuts to other essential services, because this is a Prime Minister who only defines action by what's in the short-term political interest of himself. And I'd ask Jim if he wants to make some comments as well.
Thanks very much, Anthony. The Prime Minister's hand-picked health minister was given multiple opportunities this morning to rule out further cuts to Medicare, and she couldn't do it. Medicare is not safe under Scott Morrison and Anne Ruston. That much is clear. The appointment of Anne Ruston to be Scott Morrison's hand-picked health minister will send a shiver down the spine of every Australian who needs affordable health care based on Medicare. Universal access to Medicare is at risk if Scott Morrison and Anne Ruston are given another 3 years to undermine Medicare. One of the key differences between Labor and Liberal in this election is we will always look to strengthen Medicare. The Liberals and Nationals will always look to undermine it. That's what this appointment is all about. Australians can't afford rising healthcare costs, and that means they can't risk another 3 years of Scott Morrison, the Liberals and the Nationals.
Hang on, Murray's going to make some comments.
Just before we take some questions, it's great to join you here again, Madonna. I remember being here with you in Tallwood Street just after the floods only a few weeks ago. And the reason we are here today is to show these residents that in Anthony Albanese, they would get a Prime Minister who's there for the floods and there for the recovery as well. I don't know why it is that Scott Morrison, whenever Queenslanders need him the most, he turns his back. At the height of COVID, he was demanding that Queensland's borders be opened, no matter what the health consequences for Queensland. And he's done it again now in the floods. As Anthony said, what we saw from Scott Morrison recently was when the Queensland government asked for support to help homeowners like the people we've met today to rebuild and to raise their homes, he said no, even though he was prepared to give similar support to New South Wales. Right now, flood victims in New South Wales are getting 3 times the payment that the people in Tallwood Street and Auchenflower and everywhere else in Queensland are getting. And of course, he declared a national emergency in New South Wales after the floods, but he wouldn't do that in Queensland as well. Why is it that whenever Queenslanders need Scott Morrison the most, he always turns his back, whether it's COVID, whether it's floods, whether it's infrastructure or anything else? It's about time Queenslanders and all of Australians had a Prime Minister who's prepared to work with the whole country, bring the whole country together, not pit state against state and mate against mate. We need someone who's going to work for the whole country, and that person is Anthony Albanese.